first pair of microphones died. The second one thing hadn't taken a charge overnight, and the other one was just really low volume, and I've got to figure that out later. Okay, so in this session, we're going to be talking about how to use dual monitors in classrooms and or Zoom presentations. I got really spoiled. I bought a second monitor during the pandemic. Um, I had worked with dual monitors before with some presentations I did at SUNY Oneonta, and I was really disappointed not to have that regularly. So I picked up a second monitor. I even have a portable monitor here that I keep with me, and I take, even if I'm traveling for a conference and flying, and I'm not going to bring a big monitor with me, that little portable model monitor, which you can see across the table, costs like $130 or so, and it just plugs into a USB-C port. So I'm pretty much always using two monitors. Right now I'm using a laptop, but it's as a separate monitor from the presentation, from the slides that you're seeing. And let's talk a little bit about why you might want to use one. There's a lot of things that you might want to have going on behind the scenes that you don't want to share with the people who are attending your session if you're at a conference, or that you might not want to share with all the students if you're doing a class presentation. I've in many of my classes, even since we came back to face-to-face instruction in the spring of 2021, there were still a lot of students who were going out with COVID or going out with the flu and other things, or they had transportation problems, their cars broke down and they were commuting from Syracuse, or they had a broken leg, or they were in the hospital for a week or so, and they still wanted to participate in class. And I was doing instruction where some students were in Zoom, and the rest of the class was in person. And that was especially true when I was doing a class of 250 to 300 people back in Lanigan. And so one of the things, I was in a room in the spring of 2021 where I was getting Zoom messages from students coming up as a direct message to me, but there was only one monitor in the room. And so if I read the message from students, it would be visible by all the students who were attending. And that was a little bit awkward. Now, I was also recording the classes for people who couldn't be there. So I could mute the monitor. I could mute the projector to look at it, but it would still be recorded. And a couple of times I did that. And then before I let the recording get posted, I edited out the comments, because sometimes a student would send me a message saying the audio is not working. And that's something I'd certainly want to see, for example, if there was a problem. Other times students would say, my doctor said I have to be out for another couple of weeks because I have these health conditions. That's the type of information you probably would not want to be sharing with everyone in the class, particularly, well, in any case, you don't want to be sharing other students' health information with the whole class. So having a second monitor is really useful to have those types of communications that are not being displayed and not being recorded for the whole class. So that was one of the reasons why I started trying to make sure that I was always going to be in classrooms that had two monitors. And that's really especially helpful if you're doing any type of back channel discussion, if you want students to be using chat in Zoom or whatever, or if you're going to be doing polling or using iClicker results. In terms of iClicker polls, the best practice as developed by Eric Mazur is to ask students challenging questions where the answers are not obvious, and where generally somewhere around half the class will get the answers wrong the first time, the first attempt. But in order to do that, you need to be able to see the results. And now, back when we first started using iClicker and we had the physical displays in the room, that was fine because only the instructor could see the breakdown of the polls. But that broke down when we moved to iClicker Cloud, and basically it just comes up on the screen. And again, if you only have the one screen, if for you to see the results, you're also sharing it with students unless you have a second device. But what's so much easier is if you have a second monitor in the classroom. And so that in general is why I always try to teach in a place or a location where there's a separate monitor from the one that's being shared. And in some of the large classrooms, certainly in Lanigan 101 now, we've had for about 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 even, we've had dual monitors. And that makes it so much easier to let students send messages to you that aren't displayed with the whole class, or for you to see the poll results before you decide what the next step is. Because if you do a polling question and 90% or 95% of the class gets it correct, you probably don't want to spend a lot of time discussing it or go into a second stage of polling it with some discussion. If 5% of the students get it correct, then you clearly need to scaffold that a bit more before students can have a productive discussion. So in general, it's really nice to be able to monitor the results, to see them as they're coming in, and then to be able to go in and then decide what to do from that point. So having a second monitor where you keep the poll results active is really helpful. And so when I'm going into my class, I always set it up so that I have the slides that I'm going to be using on the display that's shared with students. But on the other screen, if I'm running Zoom, for example, I'll keep the chat window open. I'll keep a list of participants open. And I'll also open up the iClicker app. And in iClicker, you can choose to display the results. But if you click on a little symbol there, it pops out those results. And I keep those on the screen that's not displayed to students, so I can monitor them constantly. And when I'm ready to share it with students, all I have to do is drag that back onto the desktop, onto the screen that the students are seeing so they can see the results, and then bring it back for the next question. So it allows me to monitor things in the background and to have everything staged so that it's ready to go. And if there's 4 or 5 different apps, for example, or different things I want to display to students, I might have some websites I want to share. I might have some resources I want to share. I have them all open in browser tabs. And then when I need to use them, I just drag them over rather than fumbling through things on the screen that's being presented. It leaves a much cleaner presentation so that you're only displaying the things you want, and it's always available to you when you need it. So that's one thing. So yeah, basically I stage materials there before a presentation, before a workshop, when I don't get there like a minute before the session begins, as I did today, and I have them all ready to go and just drag them in when I need them. And it makes it so much easier once you get used to it. Also, if you happen to be using slide notes, I generally don't, I probably should do it more, but if you have slide notes, or if you're doing a presentation which is very short and there's a lot of information you want to have, you might put some timings on the slides. You might have a timer active so that you could monitor that, again, to help maintain the pacing. One of the cases where we did that is Rebecca and I did a panel with 5 people at the Online Learning Consortium conference back in a week before Thanksgiving. And we were interviewing, again, we were interviewing 3 people, and we had a certain number of questions, and we assigned times for how much time everyone had to do that. And we kept a display. One of the monitors was just keeping track of the time to make sure we stayed on track, because sometimes people would talk a bit longer than we had hoped. And we wanted to make sure that we got through all the questions and everyone had a chance to participate. And you know how academics are. It's really easy for people just to keep talking and talking and talking. So they all had that list too, and they could share, and they could see, some of them at least could see the display. And we'd also say, well, we're running a little behind, so we have to move a little more quickly, etc. But having that visible makes it easier just to keep things moving along efficiently. So in general, the monitor you share with the class and project to the class only contains, as I said, the material you want. The monitor that only you can see would have, as I said before, sorry, it's a little duplicative, the chat and direct messages coming up so you can see them, materials you might be displaying later. For example, sometimes I'll want to show students something in Brightspace as a reminder of what they're doing if there's some sort of problem where they're missing some things or not not everyone is completing certain assignments, I'll go back in and say, look, here's where you can see your calendar. Here's the assignments you need to do. This is how you get to the interactive materials. This is how you can make sure that you've established that you've completed the readings, because I'm using in Brightspace, I'm using a personalized learning system from Lumen Learning called Waymaker. And with that, students have to, after they read a block of text and interact a bit with it, they have to complete just a few questions, just to summarize, to check on their understanding. And if they don't do that, they end up getting a 0, and it shows that they haven't completed that portion of the readings, basically. So they read some, they answer some questions, and then there's a summary portion they have to answer before they move on to the next. Sometimes they skip that, and then they end up with 0s, and that generally takes 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 reminders before everyone starts doing that in the class. But it's nice having it ready in Brightspace, so I don't have to open it up, log in, authenticate for the 6th or 7th time while students are just sitting there waiting. I have that all done before class, and it's ready just to drag over and show them. And it makes it a whole lot easier. As I said, the poll results, participant window, if you do have a large number of remote participants at a conference, or again, even in class, if we have another large epidemic, which is certainly possible, it's kind of nice to see when people are raising hands and so forth. So you may have one window that you're sharing, which has some slides or other materials that students are interacting with. And then you also have an image view of the people who are attending remotely. So you can see if students are raising hands or if something else is going on that you need to address. And what I always tend to do is I drag the Zoom control bar to the second screen, the one that's not being displayed, so it's not covering up things that get displayed. Because, you know, if you work with Zoom in a classroom or in a presentation, you've got the participants window, you've got the little box listing the names of the speakers. You can minimize that, but it's still covering part of your screen. Then you got that little control thing, which is at the bottom or the top of the screen. You can just drag that over to the other. So you've got all the controls where you have the ability to see them and engage with them without again, interfering with what's being shared with students. And similarly, I will often use the drawing tools in Zoom if students have a question about a graph or whatever, or a question where I might need a graph to illustrate it. I just click on the little drawing tools, pop it up, draw, you know, the vertices, the axes for the graph, and draw the curves as best as I can using a mouse, etc. And it's just kind of handy to have that all convenient without having to dig through or jump through one thing to another. And again, you only record the projected display because that's what you're sharing with students, and that's the content that you want shared with students, and not the behind the scenes work that you're trying to do. And one thing you want to be careful with is that if you're using Panopto or any other recording device, make sure you're recording the screen that you're sharing with students rather than the other one, because that kind of defeats the purpose of recording it. And I know that happens to people, especially if, you know, you're not used to doing this. And I know I've seen it happen. I haven't done it, but I know some people at SUNY who do this pretty regularly, even with webinars where they should know better. You know, so you get the presentation mode being displayed where you can see all the slide notes and a very tiny little window with the actual slides. And it's better just to make sure you set all of that up in advance. Just a few things not to do is to share the wrong screen. I have to say, I did that yesterday in one of my sessions until people noticed me and notified me. I was just a little careless because I've been kind of tired and not getting a lot of sleep for the last couple of weeks. So in any case, though, make sure you pay attention to which screen is screen 1 and 2. It'll show you what's on the screen, and when you select those, and be careful not to select the wrong one. Now, one other thing I strongly ask people not to do, because this was an incredible pain in the ass for the last 2 years when I was teaching in Lanigan 101, The person before me was somehow really troubled by the fact that there were two displays, and they would go into settings and they would set it up so the two displays, one right on top of the other one, were displaying exactly the same thing. That has the advantage that you don't have to worry about which display you're sharing or anything else, but it makes it worthless having two screens, and it's just kind of an annoyance. So don't ever do that. Learn how to use two screens. I had another issue last spring, and this is, again, one of the reasons that prompted me to put this very short session together is whoever was teaching, another person was teaching in the same room, in the two rooms I was teaching in Mahar last year. And at first, what they were doing is they were taking the second monitor, rotating it and pushing it out of the way, or they were taking it and put it down on the ground. And then later they were just unplugging it and putting it under the podium or moving it to the side or sticking it up against the heater. One time they put it on the side between the heater and the podium. And it was just an incredible pain having to play hide and seek with the second monitor, picking it up and plugging it all back in. And at one point, they actually bent the HDMI connector a little bit. Apparently, when they were pulling it off, they must have twisted it, which was just kind of annoying. You know, if you have two monitors, it really makes your life easier, and there's no reason to make other people's life harder by, again, playing hide and seek with it. And it did turn out it was a member of my own department that I had to talk with, and it stopped happening at that point, because what I started to do is just go in and periodically check the classroom to see who was teaching there and whether the monitor was still there. And then it got tracked down and apparently was interfering with that person's. They were bringing their own equipment onto the podium, and the second monitor there was interfering with their laptop or their iPad or something else. So, but again, the material's there for use, and it's all connected to projector, and there's a lot of good reasons to use the equipment in the room. It saves wear and tear on your equipment. And again, you're connected to the sound, you're connected to the system sounds, and it's so much easier to use the equipment there than to sabotage it for other people. Okay, that's all I have. So any questions? I'll stop the sharing.
Hey, John, quick question. So do you connect the two monitors using the HDMI?
Well, they're both connected by HDMI, but they're already connected when you're there. So they both have their own HDMI cables. And when CTS sets it up, both are plugged in. And it's just a question of whether they mirror each other or whether they're set to different displays as an extended display, or I forgot what the other terminology is.
Okay, so you just need to log into both computers?
Well, you just log in and both computers will light up. And if it's set to be an extended display, one will have the usual, since they're Windows computers, will have the usual Windows display, and the other will just have a blue screen on it. You know, maybe icons there if someone had dragged something over there. And all you have to do is, if typically it's set up so if the second monitor is on the right, you drag things to the right to get things to that screen. If it's on the left, you drag it to the left. If it's set up, as many of the classrooms are, with a monitor below the glass, below the tabletop with the glass there, and the other one on top, it's often set up so that it will appear to be above. So you just drag things up to get it to the second monitor or bring things down.
Okay. I saw it in Mahar 102, but I didn't know how to use it. So thanks for explaining.
Yeah, and usually it's already set up. You might have to press a power button, which is usually in the bottom right portion of the, right below the screen on the bottom right. Just turn it on and it should be there. One problem you could have is if someone had dragged things over there, if it was set there and you don't turn it on, there may be some things that you won't see when you try using it. So, but normally, because those are all on deep freeze, it normally resets. But well, that usually only happens if you come in and the person before you hasn't logged out, but they did turn off the other monitor.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Ben.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Please, what's the make and model of the mobile monitor that you have?
Oh, I don't, this one is called a KYY, but basically
Okay.
if you do an Amazon search for
Okay.
USB monitors, this is actually the second one I had. I bought another one that that was very similar to this, but I got run over by a car a couple of years ago, and when the people I was staying with, this was at Duke, they helped me get some stuff back into my my room, the apartment I was in. One of them broke the monitor, but they're all pretty much the same. Just look for USB portable monitor, USB-C portable monitor. You just plug it in and it just works with Windows machines or with MacBooks.
Thank you.
If it's running on Windows, well, if it typically you can run it right off of a USB. The one I have is powered by USB, but the USB is also is also the data for the projector. With some computers, you might need to have power connected to it as well as a USB cable. It all depends on the hardware that you got.
Okay.
But most new computers will work with a USB-C monitor directly. You just plug it in and a second monitor appears.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
I presume this works better for a room that has two projectors, not just one.
Oh, it's fine with just one projector, actually. Because
do you have any suggestions for when there's just one projector?
Yeah, in fact, that's what I normally have. The rooms I work in don't have two projectors. So basically, whatever you share with students goes to the screen that the projector is connected to. So when CTS connects the second monitor, one of them is going to the projector, and you can tell by turning it on and just seeing what's being projected on the screen, you know. And if you see it's typically, in most of the setups I've seen, is typically the one on the top or the one on the right, but it depends on how it's set up. But basically, one of the screens will have, since the Windows, one will have the Windows taskbar at the bottom, and the other will just be a blue screen with, you know, maybe some background image, but that's about it. So you have to keep track of which one is which by seeing what the monitor is configured to mirror. So it will mirror one of the two monitors. And that's just the one you make sure you record. And when CTS sets it up, by default, that's the one that will be recorded with Panopto, and I think with Zoom too. That's the one that will be shared, the one that's connected to the projector. And I know at least in Lanigan 101, the one below the glass is the one that you control, and the other one is the one that's shared. The one that's in front of you is the one that's shared on the projector. That's my recollection anyway. But basically, again, just see what's being projected and make sure that that's what you record, and that's the one you drag the materials to, and just set everything up on the other. So students don't have to watch you go through the various processes of authentication and multiple authentications. So any questions on that? Any other questions on this? The more you do it, the easier it gets. And I find it extremely hard to work in a room where I just have a single screen, because it's so much nicer to have that staging area where you can bring things back and forth to and from. And a good way to practice that is to pick up a cheap little USB-C monitor. If you don't have two monitors at home, pick up one of these cheap ones, plug it in, and try working with it. And then you'll find it really hard to go back. I couldn't go back. I had to use two monitors, you know, from then on. Okay, well, we should probably stop. If anyone has any questions, you know, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.